Okay, well today I'm talking to KJ Taylor, who is the author of a Griffin Rider series as opposed to a Dragon Rider series, and she's here with us at Supernova today. Welcome.
Hi there. Well, it's nice to be here.
It's good to have you. When did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
Basically, you know, when you say writer, it's the same thing as saying storyteller. So, you know, when I was a child, you know, my sister and I were playing, I would always be making up stories. And, of course, I read a lot, never heard of a writer who didn't. And, you know, from reading a lot, it's a short step to just writing it down, because that was basically where my talent was. So, you know, you want to tell stories, but you express it in the way that works for you. So some people know how to draw, so they might, you know, draw their stories in comic book form or what have you. Or they know how to act, so they act out whatever it is. But, you know, I can't act and I'm no good at art, so I wrote. And I started trying to write things. I mean, I started writing little odds and sods when I was in primary school, you know, little poems and little short stories and things. And I started trying seriously at the age of about 13 or 14. So, yeah, I don't think there was actually a day when I sat down and thought, I want to be a writer. It just kind of happened. But by the time I realized it, I was already doing it.
So it kind of grew.
Yeah, because, you know, I read books like crazy, and like I wanted to have it go. I want to do it. I want to write my own thing. I suppose the starting point for, I think, all of us is where you read and read and read until the point where you start feeling discontented. Like, I wish this happened instead. Or I wish there was a book like this, and that's when you start, you know, that's why you usually start out by writing fan fiction. Like, you know, oh, I love watching Sherlock, but when are he and Watson going to kiss? Well, that's never going to happen, so I'll have to just do it myself.
I must say, those two need to get a room, don't they?
Oh, yeah, well, I imagine they made it a little bit, you know, homoerotic on purpose, because they figured that, you know, that's the stereotype, and everyone's going to be, you know, throwing it in there if it isn't already there anyway. Anyway, who cares? Yes. You can't have intense male friendships anymore without people reading something into it. Oh dear. But that's people for you, I guess.
Yeah, actually, when you mentioned that, I was kind of like, Watson and Sherlock? Yeah. Sherlock and Moriarty. Those two seem to have a love-hate relationship.
Yeah, of course. Let's not forget the old thing about making the villain and hero hook up, like Harry and Draco and all that. And there was this huge thing in the Harry Potter fandom when they were like convinced that Malfoy and Hermione were going to get together, despite the fact that he's, well, effectively racist and also a horrible person. So it was just wishful thinking. Then they got all huffy when J.K. Rowling called them delusional. That's because you are delusional. But yeah, wanting to control other people's stories.
Yes. So what stories have you read that have inspired you? What authors would you look to as your, you know?
Well, you know, last night I actually had a little revelation. I was just, you know, walking back from the VIP party that we had, and I suddenly thought, I just realized that all of my favorite authors are men. I wonder why that is. Beats me. It wasn't like that when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I read Gillian Rubinstein and Jackie French and Elizabeth Honey and, you know, all the big names. Mind you, I was also really into Robin Jarvis, who was one of the first people to inspire me. I didn't know what fan fiction was, partly because the internet hadn't been invented, but the first stuff that I wrote was fan fiction for Robin Jarvis's Deptford Mice series, and I also would do little fan artworks for William Horwood. Was a huge favourite of mine as a kid, and is one of the few authors who I still read, because you know, kids stuff you tend to grow out of it, but yeah, William Horwood, I still reread his works over and over and over again, and absolutely love it. And these days I read Clive Barker, who I got into because I found out about this video game called Clive Barker's Undying, and I played it, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. I should check out some of his actual books. And China Miéville, I like him too. And was there someone else? Well, yeah, that about sums it up. I think writing style wise, I'm probably most similar to William Horwood, but you know, I think he's not as well known now as he used to be, so I don't think a lot of people would think to make that comparison, but that's what I reckon.
And with your evolution or growing into writing, how did you do that? Did you go out and study writing, or did you just do it while you were having a day job? What did you do?
Oh, well, I did both. So I actually signed my first publishing contract when I was in high school, And then my mother said to me, you should go into university and study writing. I'm like, I don't need to. I'm already published. No. And anyway, you can't learn to be a writer, which is in a sense true. Because you can learn technical skills, but you can't learn to be creative. You either are or you aren't, which sounds really snobby, but it's just true. It's just like how if I said to you, come up with an idea right now, you can't do it. You know, you can't come up with an idea because you want to. They just come to you like cats.
Yes.
But in any case, I did go to university in the end, after a bit of persuasion, and it turned out to be a really good idea because they didn't try and teach us to be creative. I think most of us were already writing stuff. What they did was basically they helped us tone up our technical skills. They got us to study literature so we came to understand how books worked. And they, in the actual creative writing component, we were challenged. Like we were told, you can't just, wait until you're in the mood. Sit down right now and write something about this picture. You try your hand at this and that, because the thing is that you never know if you're going to be good at something until you try it. And sometimes you don't want to try it. You have a resistance to trying it. So if you're, basically told, try it or you get, or I'll fail you, then, it takes away the tendency to be, precious about it. So it was really good for me. It really helped me to grow. And I basically, took a year or so off, doing uni, and then I came up with this Griffin series. And that's where it came from.
This Griffin series, that's an interesting way of describing it.
Well,
Can you tell us more about this Griffin series?
Well, the series overall doesn't have a name, you see, so I just call it the Griffin series or the Griffin books. It's because, typical of fantasy, they're being published in trilogies. So they bought a trilogy off me and then they bought a second one. Hopefully they'll buy the third, fourth and fifth. And each one has its own title. But it's a continuing series as well. So
hang on a minute, third, fourth and fifth. So fifth, that's 15 books in total?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I might do some prequels. I haven't decided yet. It's a fair way down the track, relatively speaking, because I write pretty fast. The thing is that each trilogy has a different protagonist and a different storyline, but there's an overarching storyline that carries through from trilogy to trilogy, which finally comes to a head at the very end. And so they're not actually called Griffin Riders, by the way. They're called Griffiners, which is like Falconer, I guess. I guess Griffin Rider sounded too obvious when I was, coming up with the idea. And I wanted to make it very different from what you usually get with, people partnered up with mythological creatures. So there's no telepathy, there's no magical marks, there's no magic at all, actually. The people don't have magical powers. And the Griffin is not your pet. It's not really your friend either. I mean, you can become fond of it, but you're never going to be able to confide in a Griffin the way you confide in a person. It's like if you tell a Griffin about your troubles, the Griffin will just say, so? Or I don't understand what you mean. Like say you were a Griffiner and you had a Griffin partner and you've got unrequited love for somebody, and if you tell the Griffin about it, like, oh well, I just really love her and but I don't think she's interested, and the Griffin will say, I do not know anything about love. There are many females to mate with. So yeah, because they're too non-human basically, and the Griffin uses you as well. So it looks upon you as a commodity half the time. So let me try and think of an example.
Well, you were talking in the panel about a lot of people don't know what a Griffin is. So
that too, yeah.
Maybe you could describe the physical attributes as well as the character of a Griffin.
I can show you my tattoo.
Oh, yeah, awesome.
I'd have to take my robe off though, it's on my shoulder.
Okay.
Oh, basically it's an eagle at the front and a lion at the back. And there are different forms of what a Griffin is, as I found out. So it's not just that people don't know what Griffins are, it's also that there are other composite creatures that sometimes get referred to as Griffins, and even if it is the eagle-lion combination, sometimes they have 4 bird feet, and sometimes they have 4 lion paws, or sometimes they have lion paws at the back and eagle feet at the front. So I went with completely eagle at the front, completely lion at the back. So they got talons up the front and claws up the back. And so it's got the head of an eagle with a big old beak. And also sometimes people give them fur on the front, but I gave them feathers. And of course they've got wings, and I gave them feathers on the tail. I've been watching the Narnia movies, as a matter of fact, and there were griffins in that, and I noticed that those griffins had tail feathers. I thought, oh, well, of course they've got to have tail feathers, otherwise how can they steer in the air? So I can't give them just, lion tail tufts, they've got to have feathers there. So yeah, and I made them very haughty and arrogant and ambitious and selfish and they're quite unapologetic about taking advantage of you. So, I mean, some people have said to me, oh, I really wish I had a griffin partner. I'm like, I'm so glad I don't. I don't like being controlled, do you? I don't like being bullied either, do you? But, you know, people partner with them anyway because you get a lot, you know, you get power and prestige and wealth out of it. So, you know, they're prepared to, you know, put themselves on the line for that.
It's
I mean,
trade-off.
a lot of, exactly. It's like being a, you know, a famous actor. You get fame, money, admirers, you get your ego stroked, which is very nice, but you also have to put up with people, you know, telling lies about you and harassing you in the street and that sort of thing. So it's a trade-off. How much do you want it?
Yes.
Do you want it badly enough to put up with the downside?
And isn't it so much easier being an author?
Well, in a lot of ways, yes. Because people usually don't recognize you. They might recognize your books, but they don't recognize you.
I've heard even Joss Whedon can walk around Comic-Con fairly anonymously.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know what he looks like, but I probably wouldn't recognize him straight off if I saw him. And that would be good because people do know who he is and they practically worship the ground he stands on, as you can imagine. I really admire him too, so if I ever met him, I'd like to meet him. I'd say hi and shake hands and try and weasel an autograph out of him.
Hey, you've said that you've got this series planned out in trilogies, and the first trilogy, I've started reading the first book of the second trilogy.
Oh yes.
And I've read enough to know for sure that it was a different story, but it was definitely a flow on in a sense. I figured it's the next generation. So
yeah,
can you tell us
pretty much.
a little bit about the series?
Well, so yeah, as for the actual characters, because the Griffins aren't, you know, the story, they're just, you know, they're the concept. Although, you know, some of the characters are Griffins, of course. Basically, the other main conceit, if you want to call it that, is that I wanted to tell the story of a villain, not a hero.
Is that
Because
all the way through?
I was sick of heroes, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the protagonist of the first trilogy is, yeah, he's a villainous character. Some people didn't pick up on it, some did. But yeah, he was always meant to be villainous in a lot of ways. I gave him all these hallmarks. And by the third book, he's been given the title of the Dark Lord, which I figured was the final giveaway. If you haven't figured out that he's the bad guy before now, then this is, you know, right up in your face. So, maybe the guy they call the Dark Lord is actually evil. But it's not as simple as that. So he plays...
Life isn't that simple.
Exactly. He plays the role. So I guess I was like trying to subvert the way it usually goes. So not only do I tell from the villain's point of view, but he's not actually a bad person completely. You know, he's bad in some ways, but he has redeeming features. So he does some pretty heinous things, but a lot of the time he does them because he's trying to achieve, you know, something good. He's trying to set his people free, and that entails killing a lot of people. So one or the other. I like to call him the Dark Lord with a heart of gold, because he seems like a really bad guy. He kills people and enjoys it. He's selfish. He's self-pitying as well, so he can be a bit, you know, what's the word, wangsty, whiny, which is what villains are like, because there is a fundamental juvenility. They tend to be fairly juvenile people.
Entitlement issues.
Yes, so I did that on purpose. They're very self-centered people, which he is. But at the end of the day, you can often rely on him to do the right thing. It's just that you don't always see it coming because he deceives you. He pretends to be selfish and cruel, but then he surprises you by doing something good.
Yes.
So if he's on your side, if you're his enemy, you're dead. But if you can get him on your side, then you'll never be better protected. You'll never have a more loyal friend, basically.
Great. And you said that you've just published book 5 in the series, so the second book in the second trilogy.
Yep.
But you've written book 12. What's it like writing so far ahead and having this lag time to actually publish?
Well, it can be a real advantage in a lot of ways because, for example, in the book that just came out, The Shadowed Throne, available now in all good bookshops, I introduced a new character called Calervo, and I decided to introduce him while I was actually writing the book. I was like, I really need a new character here who can do, certain things that the protagonist can't. So I had a good long think about it, and finally, after some hesitation, decided to introduce him. But I thought I can't have him just come out of the blue. He has to have been set up beforehand. But luckily for me, I was far ahead. So the final book of the first trilogy was not out yet. It was still being edited. So I went back and added some material after the fact to set up this character's existence, which meant that when Clervo shows up, people already know about him. And also I had people saying to me, I'm waiting to find out what happened about this character whose existence was hinted at. So that was a real boon, because if I hadn't been able to do that, then people would have, called it an arse pull. Or, oh, she's making it up as she goes along. Which I do a bit, but meant I could rescue myself. Of course, I won't necessarily be able to publish the whole series because they buy them in sets of 3, you see. That's why it's in trilogy form. Because I never actually was thinking of trilogies to begin with. I just wanted to publish a series. They're like, oh no, we only want 3 books. And the 4th book was already written at that time. So they said, never mind about the 4th book, we'll just take the first 3. And then my editor asked me, out of the blue, so does your second trilogy have a title? And I'm like, what second? Well, I suppose I could just add a couple of The Risen Sun. Well, it wasn't quite like that, but I decided to stick a couple of sequels onto the 4th book and make that another trilogy. And it was actually good that happened, because it meant that, because perhaps my idea of how the story was going to go was not too well structured or thought out at the time, so it basically helped me to rein myself in. It meant that I could stop the story from rambling too much, because each trilogy is a self-contained story with a different protagonist. And that's something that I came up with specifically because they said they would only buy 3 books at a time. So I'm hoping they'll buy the next 3 and the next 3 after that and the next 3 after that. But I've told people that even if I can't publish them, then by gods, I'll put them on the internet for free if it comes to it. But I'm sure it won't. I might just have to sell them in ebook form. Who can say? Because, it doesn't do to be too complacent. No. Kylie Chan, who I was on the panel with just now, some years ago when we met here in Melbourne, as a matter of fact, she told me that your career can end at any moment. Just because you've gotten published before doesn't mean you will get published again. There are people who have got like 3, 4, 5 books out, and suddenly, they're persona non grata. The publisher doesn't want to speak to them anymore. And that really shook me, and it taught me that I shouldn't be complacent, which is why I say things like this. You can't take it for granted. So I might have a series, but that doesn't mean that it'll ever see print or the light of day. But I am going to finish writing it.
So you're going to be loyal to the fans, regardless?
Well, there are people out there who really want to know how it's going to end, so I don't know. I mean, I don't want to just leave them hanging, especially since some of my trilogies, every trilogy ends with some clue as to, or some sort of something left hanging about what's going to happen next. So, in fact, I shall say this right now, live on camera. If the 3rd trilogy doesn't get published, people are going to be really pissed off, because the 2nd one ends on a huge cliffhanger. It ends basically telling you that something really big is going to happen, but yeah, tune in this time tomorrow. So yeah, I really hope that we don't have to end on that note, because people will be quite annoyed. I'll be annoyed too. But yeah, so I guess that was a little bit complacent, but well, there you go. I suppose the temptation to mess with people is too great sometimes.
Well, if you think about it, how long are George R.R. Martin's books? We were talking about him.
Yeah, well, he of course, his books are all sold already, but yeah, he writes at a snail's pace, which drives people crazy. But instant gratification is not necessarily a good thing, because if we could read the ending of his series tomorrow, then what would we do? Read my series instead.
Absolutely.
And I'm waiting for season 3 of Sherlock. I'm dying to see what happens next, but if I got to watch all of the episodes tomorrow, I'd like it, but then I'd feel kind of bereft. But I still want to know how he survived falling off that building. I'll be really annoyed if I never get to find out.
I'm pretty sure they're either making it or have already.
Yes, it's being filmed as we speak. I just don't know when it'll actually hit the screens. And I really hope I don't have to wait for the DVD, because that could take a year or so. Yeah. And you? When I told people that I was going to get to meet George R.R. Martin, which was, again, here in Melbourne, as a matter of fact, some years ago, a couple of them said to me, could you please tell him to hurry up? And I said, no, absolutely not. Don't even think about it. I wouldn't like anyone saying that to me. And besides, what the hell does he care what I think? He doesn't know who I am. And besides, I said, I would rather have quality tomorrow than mediocrity today.
Absolutely.
In the meantime, you can just read my new book, because, I write very fast.
And the other thing is that if you aren't happy with George R.R. Martin, there's a great song on YouTube, Right Like the Wind, George R.R. Martin.
Yes,
So funny.
I saw that. Yeah, well, and he in return put out, like links to a song called You Can't Please Everyone, so you might as well please yourself. But if it takes him that long to write it, then so be it. I have to say, though, we have the same publisher, and they were a bit irritated. They're like, we're going to ban him from going to conventions. He needs to stay home and write.
True. Is there anything on your bucket list, either as a writer or just as a person, that you really, like what's the top thing on your bucket list that you want to achieve?
Something I want to do before I die. Well, on the list was I would like to move into my own home, but that's happening this year, so that's pretty awesome. Actually, you know what? I hadn't really thought about it, but I'm just going to say it now because this is what springs to mind. I want to see a movie. I want to see a movie of The Dark Griffin or one of my Griffin books. Just one would be enough because, well, for one thing, that would be, really cool because, if you get money from film rights, and that's how, if you want to be, actually make a living from writing, getting a movie adaptation is a great way to go about it. But, less, on a less mercenary note, I just really love movies. I've always loved movies. I go to the movies pretty much every week. I see, most of the new releases. My DVD collection is falling out of my wardrobe. So seeing a book of mine in movie form would really kick ass. But that's a bit of a risky thing to wish for because be careful what you wish for, you might get it because the thing about people seem to think people ask me do you think there'll be a movie, would you like one? And I tell them, well, I try not to hope too hard because the odds of selling them film rights are pretty long. The odds of them actually making a movie are even longer. And the odds of them making a good movie are longer still. So, the odds of there being a good movie adaptation of something I wrote is something like 1,000 to 1. I haven't sold the film rights. I've got a film agent out there who's shopping them around, but, she started doing that years ago, and there's been nothing. So I think the odds of selling the film rights at all are pretty, not that great. So I'm not expecting a movie, but maybe one day, if I become well known enough, or maybe a movie would be made of something else I wrote. I don't know, but it would be nice. I would really like to see that before I die.
Well, I would personally like to see some more original movies being made, and less remakes and reboots and reimaginings of old stuff.
Well, it's your fault. Well, when I say you, I mean the general public, really. It is the general public's fault that they're not making anything original anymore. It's because film piracy is costing them so much money, it's made it so much harder for them to turn a profit on a film that they just won't take the risk anymore. Because movies are obscenely expensive.
Yeah.
And if you don't get your money back, then your studio can go bankrupt. So, it's more of a surefire profit if it's a sequel or a remake or something. So that's what they're doing.
Is there anything that you'd like to say to fans before we finish up?
Anything in particular? I don't know. I guess keep the faith, I suppose. I mean, if you enjoy my books, I hope you go on enjoying them, and I will do everything I can to keep them coming. So yeah, and if I'm in your town and you can come and see me, then please do. Don't be shy. I don't bite. I'm the shy one, really. Yeah. Well, I like meeting new people. So feel free to come and say hi, because some people seem to be a bit shy about it. But I'm completely harmless.
Well, thank you very much for talking to Dark Matter.
Well, thank you for talking to me.